Today we're going to use the advanced 3 steps to sketch method to graph a shifted cosine equation. So we want to graph y equals 3 cosine of 2x minus pi over 2 minus 1. Before we dig into the method, let's go ahead and factor out that leading 2 in front of the x. That's our b term, and we'll factor that out so we can easily see our phase shift. So we'll be working actually from the equation y equals 3 cosine. If we pull out a 2, we're left with x minus pi over 4. And then, of course, we still have the minus 1, that vertical shift down. You can distribute that 2 back, multiplication, just to make sure that you have, in fact, factored out the right term. But everything looks good, so we'll be working with this equation and using our method. All right, so let's jump in. We have our 3 steps outlined on the left, and here is our equation. We factored out that 2, so we can easily see that phase shift of pi over 4. All right, let's jump right into step 1, find our essentials. This is really where we analyze everything that's going on with this equation so we can get a really nice graph. Okay, we see that A is 3, so we know our amplitude is 3, or that's the distance from the midline up to a maximum or down to a minimum. All right, we know B, so that was A. B is going to be this 2, so we should have 2 cycles of our graph happening between 0 and 2 pi. And we can also use B to find the period. For cosine, we always do that by taking 2 pi and dividing by B. So 2 pi divided by 2, our period is pi. All right, so now we can set our scale labels. Remember, the horizontal one is really the most intentional here. We find that by taking our period and dividing by 4. So each of our main pattern pieces, our key points, will align with these tick marks. So we'll count by pi over 4 when we label those horizontal tick marks in just a second. For our vertical tick marks, we can count by 3 if we want, or sometimes I just count by 1. It's almost the same thing, but I think that lets you see the amplitude a little bit better. If you are graphing multiple graphs, you'll have that comparison. All right, so before we jump into shifts, let's go ahead and label our tick marks since we're right here. So we'll count by 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4. And let's go ahead and label just a few more. 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, which reduces, 7 pi over 4, and 8 pi over 4, which reduces to 2 pi. So take a moment to go ahead and label the left side of the horizontal axis. It'll be exactly the same as the right, but of course with negative signs. All right, so hopefully you have your left side horizontal axis labeled. And let's go ahead and label our vertical axis. So counting by 1s or 3 if you would prefer. All right, and labeling the negative part as well. All right, so we've got a nice setup. All of this information, if we were dealing with an unshifted cosine graph or a more basic graph, we've followed the basic method to a T thus far. So it's nice to just know you are building on that basic method that you probably already know. All right, now we can go ahead and analyze the shifting that's happening, and then we'll be ready to dig into our graphing steps. All right, so our shift is C over B, but because we went ahead and did that factoring out, C over B is always going to be found here in this inner set of parentheses. So we know that our C over B is pi over 4. And if you want to make yourself a note, that means you're going to move your base graph right by pi over 4. You can do that. Okay, and that should work out really nicely. Notice our scale labels are actually counting. They're in increments of pi over 4. And so when we shift, we're just going to shift 1 graphical unit because that'll be what we've labeled pi over 4. So that's going to be really nice. And you notice D is -1 or -1. So we know we're going to be shifting our base graph down 1. And we'll tackle those shifts we know in step 3. But for now, it's good. We've analyzed them and we are done finding all our essential information. You've really done all the hard work now. Steps 2 and 3 are kind of victory laps because you're just setting all that information into place and getting a nice picture. So in step 2, we plot the base pattern. And for cosine that is not reflected, and we see ours is not because we have a positive a, that base pattern will always happen as maximum, 0, minimum, 0. And 0 means x-intercept. So we know that's going to be our pattern. We know those key points will align with our horizontal tick marks. All right, so let's go ahead and set our first point of our base pattern. We know it'll be on the y-axis, and we know A tells us what the y-coordinate will be. So graph these points lightly. This is our base pattern, not our final graph. Okay, so we know our first point, our maximum for our base pattern will be at 0, 3. Okay, our next point will be an x-intercept. It'll happen at the first tick mark to the right, horizontally, of course. Okay, our minimum will happen aligning horizontally with our second tick mark to the right, and its y-coordinate will be the opposite of A, so a negative 3. Okay, again, we're just marking these lightly. This is our base graph, not our final graph. And the final point in the pattern will happen at the third tick mark horizontally, and again on the x-axis. It's our final 0 of this cycle. And I like to go ahead and just add our next tick mark. So at pi, we know we would have another maximum because at this point, our cycle, we would be on to the next cycle. Our pattern would be repeating. Okay, so we have our base pattern plotted very lightly. From here, we're almost done. We are on to step 3. We can apply our shifts that we found in the first step, and we'll be working from those points we lightly plotted. So I did that in that light blue. Okay, so we can do both shifts at the same time, and we'll just work through point by point. So we know we're going to be shifting to the right by pi over 4, or 1 horizontal tick mark in this case, and down 1. Okay, so starting at the y-intercept, move that point right. I'll do some dash marks here. We move it right by pi over 4 and down 1. So our final point, we'll go ahead and start making these large, will happen at pi over 4 too. All right, so go to your next base pattern point. That's the x-intercept at pi over 4. Move it right pi over 4. So that's 1 tick mark and down 1. All right, here's our second final point. All right, go down to the base pattern's minimum that happened at pi over 2, negative 3. You're going to move right pi over 4, or 1 horizontal tick mark, and down 1. Okay, go to your second x-intercept, the one at 3 pi over 4. Move right pi over 4, down 1. Okay, makes sense. It should be in the same line with our second point because that's our midline. Our midline has shifted. It used to be on the x-axis. Now it's at y equals negative 1. Everything shifted down 1. All right, and then of course we have our final point that starts a new cycle. Move it also right pi over 4 and down 1. So we've shifted, and now we can sketch and repeat for as many cycles as we need. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sketch this first cycle just so we can see it is this nice cosine curve. All right. So there you have one nice cycle of a very advanced cosine graph. And let's go ahead and repeat this pattern a little bit in each direction. So we'll go in the positive direction first. So we've already set a maximum. Let's do a midline point. That's what I'll call it now because it's not a 0 anymore since it got shifted vertically down. So that's a midline point, a minimum, another midline point, and that's really all we have space for here. So we can sketch that. And let's go into the negative direction as well. So you see we have now a y-intercept at negative 1. That's a midline point. We have a minimum, another midline point, and a maximum. So we just sort of worked that cycle backward. All right. And so you have almost 3 cycles there of this very advanced shifted cosine graph. This does take practice, but the template will keep you organized. And once you've tackled a few of these, I think they get much, much easier, and soon you'll be sketching these graphs like a pro.